Hey folks, I thought it would be fun just to do a little whistle stop tour of how I set up Reaper and not go into too much detail with anything, but yeah, just kind of explain my workflow and how I set up Reaper to help me just be creative and stay in that kind of fun process, because for me that's really important to experiment. So yeah, you can see the global sampler is running at the top. So if I was to play a sound, it captures up there and I can click and pull it down. So I've always got this safety net catching every sound that I make in Reaper, which is great because when you're playing with a lot of different plugins and doing some crazy stuff with delays or whatever, it can be hard to reproduce some of the sounds that you make. So I'll just show you where it's actually connected in. It's in monitoring effects. The global sampler is running there and it will catch everything. I've also got the Sound ID reference, which is making sure that my headphones are giving me a nice flat sound when I'm going late into the night. So that's great. And on the left, I've got my performance monitor, and I've got NVK Create, which I don't actually use too much for stacking sounds. I just like its kind of visuals and how it shows me what I've got on the side, and without being too imposing. On the right side, I've got some master effects. Let me just show you. I don't have the master channel visible at the moment, but if I pull it up and just bring on the effects, you can see that Reaper has these native effects that look pretty bad when you show them here, but when you dock them on the master track, they do a really nice readout of what's going on there. So you can see kind of how stereo something is and its dynamic range and its loudness over time. So that's quite useful. It kind of just keeps an eye on things, and it's very cheap as well to run those native plugins. But now onto the actual kind of process of how I get going. Well, I've got a combination of ways to keep track of my plugins because there's just so many plugins. I don't even like clicking on small buttons, so I like to use a radial menu. But this is a much faster way of applying plugins to the track, because if I was to do it this way, it actually takes quite a bit of time. If I was to just kind of type in Pro Q here, that was okay, but sometimes it's just a bit slower. It kind of has to index all of the files that are there. And if I just kind of quickly just clear that, and you can see it takes a second because I just have too many plugins. I probably need to do another clean out, but just way too much stuff. And that's just impossible to track in any meaningful way. There's just so much stuff there, especially when you have like the Waves plugins and all that. It just becomes over time ridiculous. So to avoid that, the radial menu is amazing because you can configure all of your plugins in these categories. And I think I've reached the max with what I can actually load in here. And how it works is you just, let's say I want some compression on this track. I just click Dynamics, and then I go into this sub radial, which is my actual options, and I would go with Pro C. And there we go. And it just makes it just much more enjoyable. I think it's important to keep things fun, otherwise it feels like hard work, and this radial menu is hugely useful to that end. And if I bring up the settings of it, which I've got on another hotkey, you can see how it's actually configured. I can shift click these things here, and you give it a menu ID, and you give it a name and a color if you want. And if I click it, it goes into what that menu is. And then what you do is, well, you can set your menu up the top here, and you actually need to give it an action ID so that it knows what plugin to pull up there. So again, if I just shift click it, because if I actually click it for real, it'll bring up the plugin, but shift clicking it stays in this kind of config mode. Here's the action ID. There's one little trick with this where you actually have to get the ID of the plugin, and you need to do that from this menu, from this plugin finder. So if I type Pro Q here, and if I right click it, I can, where is it? There's an option to add it as a shortcut. Oh, it's gone for me because it's already added, but there's an add shortcut option. And when you do that, it will appear as an action. Now, actions are where all the magic happens in Reaper. So it will appear here as an action. And then once it's here, you grab its action ID. And that is what that radial menu needs. Here, there it is there, copy selected action command ID. And then that's what you paste into the radio menu. So yeah, it takes a bit of time to set up, but again, it just makes life so much easier. And yeah, everything's kind of here. And for me personally, I like to kind of have plugins on the radial that I need in the moment for maybe utility reasons. Whereas I put all my kind of favorite, shaping and spectral or glitchy or grainy or kind of otherwise powerhouse plugins, I suppose, on the actual tracks themselves. And I kind of work with the combination of the two. And I find that between the two, it kind of covers a very broad palette of effects. I try not to overload it. So if I look at the effects selection here, I try not to put too much because it's just off-putting when you open up a chain that's too big. And I have all these bypassed, which means they don't actually load until I enable each individual one by, for me, holding Control and clicking there. It will enable one at a time so that Reaper loads really fast. And my general approach would be to, usually I will get some source and I will literally just click and drag the source into whatever type of track I think it should go into. Obviously, it depends what sound you're designing and what the source is. But I basically just drag the source into different tracks. And whatever track I'm working on, of course, I would spend time either making presets or just going through presets and tweaking things and just seeing what goes on. And if I like something, I'll leave it turned on and I'll move on to the next thing. And I'll have a play with that and see what the results are. And maybe I don't like the results, so I'll turn it off. And I'll just try and keep this really lean to keep the whole session performant. And if I like the effects chain, and I want to run it through something else, I will then just click and drag and I will, maybe glitch it up. And then if I like the glitch, I will maybe do something spectral. And then I've got the chain kind of running in series that way. The other way, this is really good. I should say I like this method because for me, I kind of always get a different result every time, depending on whatever effects I'm choosing and whatever way I'm routing them. It kind of always comes out a different way. And I like that because the starting point is always very clear to me. But where it goes is always kind of a process of trial and error and experimentation. So that works well. However, one drawback of this technique is that because it's kind of running in series, the dry-wet controls are very important for each effect, and I don't mind tweaking and getting that right. But sometimes I want to, let's say if I can't decide the dry-wet of each type of effect category, I will do it kind of in parallel, and I might usually set this up in advance so that I don't have to click the route every time. I don't like doing repetitive tasks, but it doesn't take too long to just route them all. And this is another way whereby you're processing your source through all of the different tracks and you're just mixing them like a conventional mixer. And this is a way that avoids the kind of dry-wet control for each effect. Of course, you still have to go in and enable the effects and all that, but it's kind of more freeform because it helps just step away from the plugins and just actually mix them together and get different sounds on the go. Obviously, the plugins will be mostly wet, and I've still got my source, so I can still mix that in dry, and I can mix everything in a kind of more conventional way. So yeah, I like to just keep either process depending on how I feel. Most of the time I go with the first technique where I'm just dragging things in, and I end up saving that so that I can not affect my template, of course, and the template's always there ready to go. So yeah, I hope you find that useful. I always like to kind of look at my process and figure out if I can improve it. And if it's working for me, I usually stick with it and I don't change it. But sometimes I feel like I just need to mix up things to try coming at the design in a different direction. But this, for me personally, is a lifesaver. I couldn't do without that now. I'm just so used to it. And the idea of playing with tracks in a kind of creative way, and it just keeps it fresh for me. But I'd love to know what other people are doing. And I think it's always really interesting, the topic of workflow, because it's something that I feel isn't really spoken about that much. And, you know, people go into all the detail in different areas, but workflow is really interesting to me, how people approach and how people think about what they're doing. So yeah, hope you found that useful, and thanks for watching.